Speak up.
That was just a test run. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the first ever Seattle City Council Candidate Forum sponsored by the Seattle Police Officers Guild. I'm Kevin Stuckey. I'm the president of the Seattle Police Officers Guild. SPOG is the largest police labor union in the Northwest, and we represent all the officers and sergeant on the Seattle Police Department, which right now is just over 1,300 members. There's only one topic for tonight's forum, and that is, in our opinion, the single most critical issue facing the city of Seattle, and that is public safety. All of the candidates for the Seattle City Council were invited to this event, and some have chosen not to attend for a variety of reasons. We would like to thank the candidates who are here tonight and took the time to be with us and share their thoughts on public safety. In the audience tonight, we have Seattle's finest, Seattle police officers, both active and retired, and their family members. We have Seattle's bravest, members of the Seattle Fire Department and the Firefighters Local Union 27, with President Kenny Stewart, who is also with us tonight. We have representatives from the Seattle Police Dispatchers and Parking Enforcement officers. We also have community members from various organizations, including our precinct advisory councils, business groups, as well as other members in our community who believe that public safety is a really important issue. A couple of quick housekeeping announcements. A restroom is located near the entrance where you enter tonight. There's also one upstairs. This event is being video recorded tonight, so we ask that you refrain from all side conversations. To respect all of the candidates, we also ask that there be no excessive clapping and certainly no booing. Outbursts of any kind will not be tolerated. There should be question cards on each chair. If you would like to ask a question, please write it down on the card and someone will come and collect them from you. We hope this will be a very informative evening as we explore the opinions of these city council candidates. So without further ado, please help me welcome our moderator for tonight, a distinguished journalist. She hosts The Divide on Q13 News, where she searches for common ground on controversial issues. As well as a correspondent for the station's morning news, she covers politics, crime, and policing, and crisis. Please give a warm welcome to Brandy Cruz.
Thank you, Kevin and Spog, and I'm sure most would agree that public safety is such a critical issue this time around. We want to make sure we get to the questions as quickly as possible. I do want to have one note: we are still expecting Ann Davison Sattler and Heidi Wills as well. They're running a little bit behind, but we are told that they will be here. So when they come, we will allow them on stage. And also just a note, Egan O'Ryan in District 3, he has 2 forms today. So he's going to be here until about 6:35. And then we are going to graciously give him an applause when it comes time for him to leave. So Egan, thank you for being here for the next half hour. We're going to hear opening remarks from all of the candidates this evening. They have 1 minute and 30 seconds. I've asked the candidates to try to stick to their time cues, and I'll reiterate what Kevin said, which is we have a really zero tolerance policy for any outbursts from the crowd this evening. Very gracious that the city council candidates have decided to come and talk about this critical issue, so please be respectful of the fact that they are here. We are going to start with opening remarks. Councilwoman Lisa Herbold in the 1st District, your opening remark, you have 90 seconds.
Thank you. I have to hold it down the whole time, okay. Thank you so much for hosting this forum. I want to just share a little bit of my experience as a community organizer. In my 20s, I worked for an organization called Syracuse United Neighbors, working in low-income neighborhoods, bringing neighbors together to focus on issues important to the residents of those neighborhoods. The issues that I worked on most with that group were public safety issues. I have a long history and deep respect for the role public safety plays in all of our communities and the unique impact that unsafe communities have to our lowest income communities, and I've demonstrated that commitment through the work I've done both with organizations like Syracuse United Neighbors, other organizations that I've done community organizing with since then, but also in my time as a legislative aide working for a council member who chaired the Public Safety Committee. I believe really strongly that we need to fulfill our commitment to the public to grow the size of our police department. In 2014, we made a pledge to grow our police department by 200 officers. We have dedicated the money to do so. We have created new positions to do so. And now we need to focus on practices that will encourage recruitment and retention of our police department. Public safety is a core service and responsibility of local government, and I will continue to work on those issues. Thank you.
Phil Tavel, District 1, 90 seconds, sir.
Thank you. Yes. Hi, I'm Philip Tavel. I'm running for Seattle City Council for District 1, which is West Seattle and South Park. I was a high school physics teacher, a business owner, and for the last 15 years, a trial lawyer and primarily a public defender. The interesting thing is when I was in law school, I actually worked for the Manhattan District Attorney's Office and then for the Ulster County District Attorney as well. And when I moved out here, I didn't necessarily know I would end up working for the Public Defender's Office, but I did started working in their driving with license suspended program, helping people divert out of that. And I just kind of fell in love with the job and fell into it. And public safety is obviously a big part of that. The people that I represent are, an element of both the problem and what the cure needs to be and how we have to help people. Right now, I am the vice president of the Morgan Community Association. I live in Arbor Heights, and as that role in the Morgan Community Association, I sit on the Southwest Precinct Advisory Council. Done that for 3 years now, and listening to the issues from our community and from the police officers. And I believe that in Seattle, we need a supported, properly funded, and just properly helped police force. We obviously need accountability, but at the same time, we need to be able to say thank you for the job that the police do. Thank you for keeping us safe and helping our community. And we need to support that as much as possible. When we talk about adding new jobs, we need to make sure we're talking about net jobs, not just gross, because there are a lot of officers that are leaving and just adding jobs isn't enough. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We're going to move on to District 2. Mark Solomon, your opening remarks.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Mark Solomon. I am running for Seattle City Council for District 2, which represents parts of Pioneer Square, Chinatown, SoDo, Georgetown, and all of Southeast Seattle. And the reason I'm running is because I feel that this city needs to do a better job of addressing the needs of the people in my community. I was born and raised here. I'm a Seattle native. I actually live in the house my grandparents built. And I've experienced the changes and challenges that everyone else has. And in my experience as a retired Air Force officer, a former small business owner, and a crime prevention coordinator with Seattle Police for the past 29 years, I know the importance of working in partnership and collaboration. And I've been working as a bridge between the city and the community, working on developing solutions to the problems that we face. And I know in working with our officers and our other first responders, they need to be supported. They need to also engage with the community in holistic and meaningful ways so that we can build trust and actually reduce crime, because working together in partnership is how we get things done. And that's going to be my focus, building that relationship, enhancing those relationships, and reducing crimes in our community so everyone can feel safe.
Thank you, sir. We'll move on to District 3. Egan Orion, your opening remarks.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. There's two things that we know for sure. One is that public safety is a critical issue for many voters in this year's election. The other is that we're losing police officers faster than we can hire them on the SPD. Public safety is an essential part of our everyday lives, of course. This really hits home for me in where I live in the Central District, where we've had a whole spate of shootings this last year. One that was very close and really tragic was the death of Royale Lexing, a 19-year-old, just a block away from where I live. It's one of the reasons that we decided to open our campaign office in that location, because we know that activated, connected neighborhoods are a great way to address public safety. We do need accountable constitutional policing, and we also need to stabilize our force and celebrate the great work that officers are doing every day out on our streets, putting their lives on the line for public safety for all of us. What we can do right now, we need to build back trust with communities, particularly communities of color and the LGBTQ communities. And we know that this is where I work in the in Capitol Hill and Central District. We know the East Precinct has been doing a great job of outreach, but we can always do more. Public safety is crucial, and I'll fight for that on City Council.
Thank you, sir, and welcome to Heidi. Good to see you. We'll let you take your seat. All right, we'll move on to District 4. Sean Scott, your opening remarks.
So I am Sean Scott, running to represent Northeast Seattle. District 4 is the area covering the University District, Roosevelt, Wallingford, and greater Northeast Seattle. I think whether it was the Mass Coalition Forum or the Health and Human Services Coalition Forum or a few other really important progressive issues around progressive issues that we have had forums for, it has been often the case that I've been the only District 4 candidate present. So I'm glad to be here today. I do think that there are going to be some real differences of opinion. I am somebody who considers himself a police abolitionist. I think that the links that we have seen historically between some very entrenched forces of institutionalized racism in the city of Seattle and beyond have really been meted out in the way that police power has victimized and really endangered a lot of people of color in particular. I'm running to represent the area where Charleena Wiles was killed in 2017. The question of police accountability and the question of what we're going to do to actually undo racist policing is something that we have tried to lead on in the course of this campaign. And I look forward to having as robust a discussion as we can about that issue in particular, because I do think that it falls pretty squarely in the category of public safety for many people of color, both in the city of Seattle or both in District 4 and beyond, who feel an antagonistic relationship with the police, to say the least. We need to get straight on what it is that we're going to do to end racist policing in the city of Seattle.
Thank you, sir. No one from District 5 is here yet, but we do, as I said, expect Ann Davis and Sattler to be arriving shortly. So we're going to move on to District 6. Dan Strauss, 90 seconds for your opening remarks, sir.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Dan Strauss. I'm running for City Council here in District 6. I was born and raised in Ballard, and I want to guide Seattle's growth to be sustainable, equitable, and affordable for everyone who lives here, to be able to have a good quality of life, whether you've lived here for 40 years or you moved here this year. I've dedicated my life to public service. I've served in AmeriCorps and in community organizations throughout my career and worked for a number of different legislative bodies. In North Seattle, we only have one police precinct serving 3 different council districts, and it's clear that we're going to need to expand to have another police precinct, most likely on the other side of the I-5. We are going to also need to make sure that we staff our police force correctly, and that means retaining more police officers. We've got some of the best trained police officers in our state, and that's oftentimes why other districts try to poach our officers. These are the things that we need to address in our city to make sure that we've got response times that people can count on in our district. And you know, one of the reasons that I'm running is because I really do believe everyone should be able to work one job that lasts 8 hours, have the family medical leave, the paid vacation time, and the access to affordable child care that they need to have a good quality of life in our city.
Thank you, sir. Also for District 6, Heidi Wills, 90 seconds for your opening remarks.
The whole time. Okay, thank you. I'm Heidi Wills, and I'm running because I'm deeply concerned about the quality of life in our neighborhoods and in our small business districts. 20 years ago, I was the youngest person elected to the Seattle City Council, and I served for a term, had an opportunity to do some great things and have some hard knocks. And since that time, I've been running a small business. We employ 65 people in our community. It's called Compendium. We make inspirational gift products. I've been working with youth in South Seattle as the executive director for a nonprofit. And I'm a working mom. And we haven't had a mom raising teenagers on the city council in this millennium. So that's a special lens that I bring. I have a broad perspective and I have broad support. And I believe that everyone deserves to feel safe and be safe where they live and work. I've been running a grassroots campaign. I've knocked on, with my campaign, over 25,000 doors, District 6. And I can tell you that not everybody feels that way. and everyone deserves to. And that's a big part of the reason why I'm running. I believe that we can have, on one hand, police accountability and civilian oversight, and on the other hand, support the men and women on the front lines in our police department. I think this issue's become too polarized in City Hall, and we need to make a change. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. We'll move on to District 6, or District 7. Jim Pugil, your opening remarks, sir.
Good evening, and thank you all for being here tonight. I'm Jim Pugil, running for Seattle Council District 7. For those, it's Pioneer Square, downtown Belltown, South Lake Union, Queen Anne, Inner Bay, and Magnolia. It's almost the identical footprint of the Seattle Police West Precinct. I've been in Seattle my whole life. I've been living in the district since 1991. I went to the University of Washington. We had 3 kids, and I worked for the Seattle Police Department from 1982 until 2014, where I left as interim chief. I then went to the King County Sheriff's Office and was the chief deputy, helping Sheriff Urquhart as his number 2 appointee to run that agency. What I found with both the Seattle Police Department and my work with King County is Seattle and the entire region is facing a lot of the same issues. It's homelessness, it's affordability, it's transportation, it's public safety. As most of you know, the King County Sheriff's Office contracts with 14 different agencies out of 10 of those town halls. If you shut your eyes, you could swear that you're in Seattle. It was about homelessness, affordability, opioids, mental illness, everything else. I've worked on non-traditional programs to make neighborhoods safer with non-traditional partners in the past, and that's what I hope to do on bring my experience to the City Council. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Also for District 7, Andrew Lewis, your opening remarks.
Thank you so much, and thank you all for coming out here tonight. My name is Andrew Lewis, running for Seattle City Council District 7. First, I want to start off by saying thank you for your service to all of the Seattle police officers and firefighters that are in the room tonight, as well as other folks that work for the City of Seattle. I have the great privilege of serving as assistant city attorney and bringing cases to trial that have been worked up by the women and men who serve on our police force and serve as our first responders. And I'm really proud of the dignity that I've given to them as witnesses, the courage that I've seen in the courtroom with them following through on their cases that give closure to victims, and thank you very much for your service. I grew up in Ballard in a union family where I, from a really early age, understood the importance and the critical place in our economy of the collective bargaining process, and understand that collective bargaining builds strong families, it builds labor families, it builds families that are able to send their kids to good public universities, that are able to put down roots in a city like Seattle that's becoming increasingly unaffordable, and I am a strong supporter of collective bargaining rights. We need to hire more police officers in the city. I see on a daily basis that there's parts of our city where we don't have the staffing numbers to have effective community policing strategies and deter the kinds of crimes of opportunity that are prolific. We need to be building rapport with small business owners and community members, and I look forward to talking more about that through the rest of this evening. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And I am going to, Ann, welcome. Ann Davison-Sattler in District 5. We're giving 90 seconds for opening remarks if you'd like to give that. And you just got to hold down the button the whole time.
Excellent. Thank you. I apologize for being late. I was talking to residents at their doors up in the north end and got caught in long conversations because I really enjoy listening to people. And that really is part of the campaign that I'm running, is about really reestablishing connection to local representation. I feel like that's a piece that is critically missing, and it is a piece that people are hungry for. So I am someone that never looked to go into politics, but I feel like that's the type of people we need to have. We need to have people who are there because they want to see problems solved, people helped, and people respected and listened to. I feel like we are a city that is calling out to be heard, and it is disconnected from our leadership at the moment. That's what I'm hearing from residents all over the city. We just recently had a poll that was released online that the question was, does your city council listen to your concerns? And the percentage was 2% said yes and 98% said no. So I'm a Wedgwood mom, a lawyer. I moved here 23 years ago. I am here because I want to see our city become a better place. I'm focused on 3 primary issues. It is homelessness and housing, it is public safety, and is addiction prevention and recovery. These are critical things. We should be in a triage time as a city. We should treat problems with a sense of urgency. When we declared a state of emergency on homelessness, we need to be giving it a proportional response, and I'm here to make sure that we have a good policy approach for that and do so. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. We'll get to the questions. For those in the crowd, while this is a forum hosted by SPOG, they have had no input in the questions I'm going to be asking this evening, although we will get some questions from community stakeholders. We're going to start with Egan Orion in District 3, because this is the only question you're going to have time for this evening. So make it count, okay, sir? And then we're going to applaud for you and allow you to leave for another forum. As you know, anytime a police officer uses force in the city, it can be controversial, and the way that elected leaders respond to those incidents is important as well. I'm going to give an example of one that made some headlines that your opponent was involved in. Your opponent accused Seattle police of carrying out a, quote, brutal murder in the shooting of Shay Taylor in 2016. The officers were not charged in the shooting, and later they actually sued the councilwoman for defamation, although their lawsuit ended up being thrown out. When deciding how to respond publicly to such shootings or high-profile uses of force, if you're elected, what factors will you weigh? 90 seconds.
Well, there are processes that exist within the department to be able to address these issues, and that's part of contract negotiations. It's part of the consent decree. So I would really want to look to see how that process plays out, because we've set up these systems to hold folks accountable, to get to the truth, and under the consent decree and also the accountability law that the city council passed several years ago, there are many steps to this process. There's a criminal part to it. There's an administrative part to it. There's a policy part to it. So there are steps in place in order to satisfy the process. I think that for me, if I'm lucky enough to be elected to city council, I want to respect the process. I think that it's robust. Is there more that we can do? Absolutely. And I think that when there's a chance to renegotiate the SPOG contract, we could do that. But let's respect the contract. Let's respect all the players that play a role in getting to the bottom of these police matters, and not jump to the gun, because I think that can also have an effect on morale and on the outcome of these cases.
Okay, Egan Orion, District 3, you have to go to another forum, so please do give him a round of applause for coming down here to speak to you this evening. We're going to go back to District 1 with questioning, and we will start with you, Councilwoman Herbold. In 2016, Seattle Police Chief Kathleen O'Toole fired police officer Adley Shepard for punching a handcuffed woman in the face after she kicked him. But later, an independent arbitrator ruled Shepard could get his job back. In a very rare move, the city challenged that binding arbitration in court. Do you believe the city was right to challenge binding arbitration? Yes or no, and why?
I think that was an appropriate move for the city to take. I think there are sometimes under the rule of law and interpretation of contract language, there are sometimes gray areas that need a court to intervene to determine what the actual interpretation is of the language. This is precisely the issue that the federal judge has identified as a policy issue that the judge feels is unresolved in the current contract that has been negotiated, that the council approved, specifically related to arbitration. So it is something that is still a significant issue that we need to address in order to come into full compliance of the consent decree and get out from under this consent decree, which I think is a key issue in addressing our staffing challenges of the police department.
Councilwoman, thank you. Phil Tavel, same question, but I'm curious if you think the city's decision would hurt their bargaining position in the future by calling into question whether final and binding truly means final and binding. 90 seconds, sir.
So it's interesting. There's a couple ways to look at it because for me, I look at it a little bit as an attorney, which says, you did collectively bargain this, you had binding arbitration, a decision was reached, and so really by the letter of the law, you should be honoring that decision. Now, as a citizen of the city, I have a second feeling, which is, when you see that video of an officer, violating that idea, that duty to protect and serve, and to violate the trust of the people to strike someone in that situation, it seemed wrong. And so with the city deciding that this seemed like it went beyond where the arbitration was and they decided to appeal it, I'm a little bit torn because on the one hand, it felt like it was potentially the right thing to do, but I do believe actually more importantly, you have to respect the collective bargaining agreement and that it was binding arbitration. I do think that it sets a bad precedent moving forward and makes it hard to do that negotiation when you're going to go against something that was negotiated for. So this is why exactly, as we look at the consent decree and we address the issues that are there, we need to just do a really good job of setting forth those rules and regulations that both sides agree to and then hold to it. You shouldn't be allowed to break that and sort of change those negotiations later.
I just want to be clear. I think I got the gist, but because you used the word torn, do you believe the city made the correct decision to challenge it or not?
So no, I would say the city should have gone by the binding arbitration, but I understand where it came from.
Okay, thank you. We're going to move on to District 2 and Mark Solomon. Seattle Police Chief Carmen Best, as I'm sure you heard over the summer, made a very rare public statement asking city leaders to support her officers or risk losing more of them at a time when staffing is lower than some believe it ought to be. What form of support do you believe officers are looking for? And do you think that is the primary reason officers are leaving?
In my experience in working with these officers on a daily basis, the support they need is to know that their city leadership values them and does support them, will have their back, at the same time asking for or demanding accountability and demanding good, constitutional, unbiased policing. They're not mutually exclusive. So you can have an officer doing a good job and being acknowledged for that. And I can tell you, in working with these men and women, that they are some of the most dedicated people I've ever come across. At the same time, they will be the first ones to tell you that no one hates a bad cop more than a good cop, right? So you support the officers by letting them know that they're appreciated, that they're doing good work, yet you can still hold them accountable. And as an elected official, it's acknowledging their sacrifice. It's acknowledging the good work that the public officials, that our firefighters, our police officers are all doing.
And do you believe that is the primary reason why there's a low staffing situation, lack of support?
That is one of the reasons. It may not be the primary reason because there are other factors that play into that, such as working conditions in other cities, benefits that other cities offer, and just the political tone of this city may cause some of our officers to seek employment elsewhere.
Thank you, sir. We'll move on to District 4 and Sean Scott. While law certainly doesn't require it, do you believe that SPOG and the city should open their contract negotiations up to the public? Yes or no, and why?
So I would have to say unequivocally yes. We have been endorsed in the district, and we have 60 seconds for these answers.
90 seconds.
90 seconds, okay,
Yes.
good. So we have been endorsed in this race by UAW 4121, as well as by SEIU 6 and AFT 1789, the teachers union, so that the respect that my campaign has for the collective bargaining process, I think, has been verified by some of the groups that have supported us, as well as the fact that I was once a labor organizer with the Campaign Workers Guild. So I think we have been in a position where we have had to falsely choose between, I think, the integrity of the collective bargaining process and, frankly, the right of poor people, houseless people, black and brown people in the city of Seattle to feel safe. I think that we would be deluded to think that the Police Officers Guild would knowingly or willingly reopen contract that was litigated, that was bargained over. But I think it's been pretty clear, judging by the fact that we have a police force that is in essence still under federal investigation as a result of the consent decree, that we still have a lot of issues. A federal judge reified that viewpoint. A number of council members who I think unfortunately may have signed to have the police contract ratified, believing that maybe down the line we could sort of nip and tuck and get to the place where we need to be on police accountability, have since reversed their positions, I think, in some ways, in saying that we need to see more accountability measures. So I would have to say the answer to your question would be unequivocally, yes, I do think that that should be something that we should revisit.
Thank you, sir. We'll move to District 5, Ann Davison-Sattler. Recently, Crosscut reported that Seattle police have started routinely arresting sex workers on Aurora Avenue North. This is despite years of sort of shying away from that practice. They were focusing more on the demand, the Johns. For you, SPD cited a rise in street prostitution, but also complaints from community members about a concern in the rise in street prostitution. What is your response to this shift that SPD has made, according to Crosscut, over the summer? The shift in reverting to arresting more sex workers after 7-8 years of shying away from that practice.
This is something that I've heard from residents in the last couple of days in particular. One woman that is a caregiver at a senior home, she wrote me specifically about this. And another is a mom of 3 young boys who lived in an apartment complex. And she entered into the elevator of their apartment building, and there was a woman in the elevator providing that service. And so her family has since moved out of the city and are now residing in Linwood. So it is a serious issue because it is affecting people daily. And I've been out door knocking around the areas, and the increase of what I even see is noticeable. The change in the procedure of how they're handling it is something that I think that there should have been more conversation about. I understand the need for keeping things more stealth-like. I've heard at the North Precinct Advisory Council meeting that we often they don't want to let the public know as to the changes that are going to be made tactically for what they're trying to do. But at the same time, we need to understand that there are a lot of young girls and women and anyone that's in that that are doing that are not often there by choice, that we need to make sure that if they are vulnerable and cannot self-advocate, that we are getting them connected into help, and that we are looking at those that are wanting to traffic, right, and that are wanting to abuse people in that type of a way.
Thank you, ma'am. District 6, we'll start with Dan Strauss. Recently, several businesses have announced they're going to close due to concerns over crime, notably Bartell Drugs in downtown Seattle. And actually today, Coma had a story about a company in your district, District 6, Impact Bioenergy, that said that it was going to move over the same issue. What would your message be to small businesses in District 6 who are worried that theft, vandalism, and other street crime is going to force them to close? 90 seconds, sir.
Yeah, so this is part of what I addressed in my opening statements, that we need to be able to have response times that businesses, residents, people in our community can count on. And that's one of the reasons why we need to have a fully staffed police force. We need to have a police force that retains good officers and compensates people for their jobs. We need to have more law enforcement assisted diversion, because officers should not be our social workers. You signed up to protect the public. We need to be able to have enough case managers for law enforcement assisted diversion to be able to meet people at point of arrest and make that decision to either go to accept services or to go to jail. These are the programs that we need to have so that we can ensure that people are not coming into stores repeatedly and shoplifting these goods. And we need to be able to have a community that knows their police officer, that's walking their beat, that is a known entity within the community, that is building relationships, so that folks know when they're calling 911 who's going to be showing up.
Thank you, sir. Heidi Wills, same question to you. What would you say to these businesses who think, I might have to close down over the crime concerns?
I've spoken to a lot of these businesses, have a lot of support within the Chamber of Commerce in Fremont and in Ballard. And the reason is because I've prioritized public safety in my campaign. My friend here doesn't mention it in his voter pamphlet statement, but it's something that I talk about a lot, and it's where the real need is in District 6. In fact, public safety is a priority I'm finding not just in my district, but throughout the community. We know that property crime is up in Fremont, where I live, 57% in the last 3 years. It's up 24% in South Ballard. Also, we know that police response times have really suffered over the last several years. Just this year alone, priority 2 response times are 90% slower in South Ballard than the rest of the response times citywide. For priority 1, they're 50% slower. This is a big concern of small businesses, and the repeat offenders is another big concern. The fact that our small business districts had to commission a report in order to tell city officials to do their job is deeply concerning. The fact that we have 100 repeat offenders committing 3,500 of the crimes in this community, and that our number of cases that are being filed by our city attorney are so much in decline. These are deeply concerning issues for our district.
Dan, do you want to take 20 seconds and respond to the voter pamphlet jab? Do you not?
I talk about public
Okay.
safety all the time.
Okay.
We have a limited number of words. I talk about so many issues. Public safety is very important to me.
Okay, we'll move on to District 7. Jim Pugil, the first question is for you. In 2018, you appeared in a campaign ad alongside the sister of Charlena Lyles, a woman shot and killed by Seattle police officers. In the ad, but for the folks in the room, you urged voters to approve I-940, which required statewide de-escalation training for police, but also made it easier for officers to be prosecuted for misusing deadly force. As you may know, that ad didn't go over well with some people in the room. Do you care to use an opportunity to explain your decision to appear in it? 90 seconds.
Absolutely. Thank you. In fact, Officer Jokel had just asked me about that backstage, and so I'll explain to everyone here what I just explained. Quite a diverse group of, very diverse group of people came together after several different police-involved deaths and said, we've got to do something. We've got to train them better in crisis intervention and in de-escalation, and we have to lower the bar to charge an officer who is acting improperly. It's the same charging standard that was present when I was hired in '82, and it was increased or raised in 1985 or '86, where it involved the word malice. When I saw the way that the divergent groups had come together, had gone down to Olympia, that people on either side of the aisle had agreed to the language, and the Equal Rights Washington said, okay, then we won't do the initiative. Tim Eyman appealed it and said, hey, you violated the initiative process. The Supreme Court agreed, and so they approached me and said, would you sit here? The person I decided to sit with, I know it offended people. I talked with her at length before. She still has her children go up to police officers, even though the police officers don't know who they are, and she's teaching them to get along with police officers. And then I was also convinced by the legislatures that once the initiative passed, it would be the first bill that they passed, and that's exactly what they did.
Just as a follow-up, would you appear in that ad again today if you were asked?
Yes.
Okay. Andrew Lewis, what role do you think that city council members should play in the aftermath of a fatal officer-involved shooting? 90 seconds, sir.
Well, first off, any officer-involved shooting is an immense tragedy in our community. Whenever an officer uses force, they're using force in all of our names, and regardless of whether that shooting is ultimately determined to have been justified or in the interest of public safety, or to have been a massive abuse of the power and trust that we give to officers, it's the job of the Seattle City Council to get all the facts, to be a comforting source of confidence for the community, and that we are going to get to the bottom of the facts in this case. There will be a full and fair inquest, and that the city is going to be transparent with all the information, and that the council demands that the city be transparent with the inquest, provide all of the necessary information for them to complete their investigation, and have a trier of fact determine what happened in the shooting and give closure to the community, give closure to the families involved. It's how we need to proceed.
Thank you, sir. We're going to move back to District 1. Phil Tavel, you will have the first answer. What do you believe the biggest impediment is to SPD's full and effective compliance with reform? And what would you suggest at this point is the best avenue to address that impediment to become back in full and effective compliance?
I think it's the fact that we have so many different pieces that are on different pages right now. The mayor's office, the council, the city attorney, the King County prosecutor, the police department, they all seem like they're on different pages, that we aren't working together to support each other to go forward, that there's so much finger pointing, there's so much, indecision over what we need to do. And so right now, I actually think the biggest impediment is that we don't have a council that fully supports and backs our police department. And I think if we had that, we could start bringing people onto the same page to come together so we could at least agree on what we want, that we want a police department that is supported, properly funded, properly staffed, properly trained, and held meaningfully accountable so that the people of the city also feel that the ideal of protect and serve is what that the police department is holding to.
So in all of that, is there something there concrete that you think, let's say everybody comes together and works together nicely, that can push SPD out of the reform process?
I mean, really, it's just, it's agreeing with something that Judge Robarts is going to say means that we're holding police accountable when there are issues and that we have bargained for a process that works. I mean, I guess I don't know how much more you can have concrete, especially since I haven't been at the table with those negotiations. But that's where I just think if we're all coming at from the same angle, that we just want to satisfy the consent decree to get that out of the way so we can have a functioning police force again, it's just going to take being able to believe the other side, listen, and find common ground.
Okay, Councilwoman Herbold, same question to you. What is the biggest impediment right now to full and effective compliance, and how do you address it to move on?
Judge Robart identified what the three issues are that he would like to see the city and SPOG, together with the CPC, resolve. So we know what the issues are, and so I think the impediment is really the process moving forward. Some folks think that we should just work to address those issues in the regular bargaining process, which will begin next year. We don't know how long it will take. Bargaining typically goes beyond the contract period, so there's no guarantee that it will happen in a fashion that's expeditious. The really unfortunate thing is we were 7 months away from being out from under the consent decree when Judge Robart identified those three items. And so until we're back in compliance, we're having to restart the clock and have another full 2 years of being under the consent decree. So I think it's really important for us to pull those three items out of the normal bargaining process voluntarily with SPOG's agreement, and with SPOG's recognition that it is in everybody's best interest that we resolve those three issues, because those are the issues that I think are really important to the core concerns around staffing, around hiring, around police morale. It's very difficult for our police officers to be working under a consent decree for the number of years that we have, and working on those issues will take us forward to get out from under the consent decree.
Let me just ask you both quickly in very brief answers. Do you agree with what Judge Robart did in pulling SPD out of full and effective compliance?
When we were in discussions around the contract, the council identified in anticipation of the judge's ruling the three items that he ended up identifying for concern, and we identified them in a resolution.
So do you agree with his decision?
Yes, we asked for that decision. We asked for the judge to look at those three issues because we knew they were of concern.
Phil Tavel, do you agree with what the judge did?
I certainly can see why he did it. As far as agreeing with it, Again, my apologies. Being, having the lawyer brain and the citizen brain is a different thing. And given where we were, I mean, look, if we want to be out from under the consent decree, we're going to have to make sure that we do everything as well as humanly possible. So I guess for now, I think it's as unfortunate as it is. I think he set up a standard that if we can actually now accomplish that, we get out from under it, nobody's going to question it. So I would say it was a decent move to do it, and I understand why he did.
Okay, so is that a yes, you agree with him?
So yes,
Okay,
I agree
thank
with
you,
the
sir.
decision.
Thank you. We'll move on to District 2, Mark Solomon. Earlier this year, Mayor Jenny Durkan announced emphasis patrols in several neighborhoods. I believe initially it was 7, including Soto and Georgetown, which are in District 2. Councilwoman Lorena Gonzalez then questioned SPD at a committee meeting. She questioned whether the patrols would lead to discriminatory arrests and expressed concern that the neighborhoods chosen were done so for the sake of political expediency or because of vocal special interest groups. Do you share any of those concerns about the emphasis patrols conducted in District 2?
There we go. As someone having grown up here and having the lived experience that I do, I am always concerned about disproportionate policing in certain communities. And I'm always mindful of that because it has impacted, the folks in our community. Well, when I think of the areas where we were doing our emphasis patrols, that was a direct relation to the incidence of crime, the rise in property crime in Soto, for example. So, in the rise of violent crime in other areas. Now, I can't say that those impacts, those contacts were necessarily disproportionate. I can say that that emphasis was necessary to address the crime concerns that those communities were facing. At the same time, recognizing that we have had traditional issues with issues of bias crime in our community, we have to be mindful of that. We have to be recognizing that and work towards resolution and better community relations.
I'm going to ask a follow-up for the timers once I've concluded my question, if you could give them 30 seconds. Carmen Best, the chief of police, told me in an interview and pointed to the example of SPD being called in to talk about these emphasis patrols as being an example of SPD not support, or of the council not supporting the police department. Would you have, if you were on the council, would you have any concerns about emphasis patrols that would be so great that you would want SPD to come in and talk about why they're doing emphasis patrols?
Yes, I would.
And would they be the discriminatory issues? Is that something that you would call them in to discuss to council?
Yes, I would, because I'm thinking of my community and the relationship between the community and the police department. As I mentioned in my opening, to build bridges between and the police for almost 30 years. And I know that when we get together, we have dialogue. We talk about what's going on. We talk about our relationship. We talk about how we can make it better. That's how we get towards building that trust.
Thank you, sir. District 4, Sean Scott. I want to have you just explain something that you mentioned in your opening remarks, because I think that the crowd understanding it is important to your answers to some of the questions that I'm going to ask you, okay? You had mentioned you're a police abolitionist. So can you take just 30 seconds to talk about, a timeline for that, like what you mean by that, so we can have that as a starting point for the question I'm going to ask you?
So, sure, the reference point, and I think the best and most clear definition for what police abolition means, was set forward in a book written by Michelle Alexander called The New Jim Crow, where she described the links that the current prison industrial complex and the rise of for-profit prisons, and in many cities an apparatus of over-aggressive and racist policing that has emerged to sort of steer many black and brown bodies back into in essence, a form of slavery that was excused by the 13th Amendment, very clearly making a stipulation saying that slavery was outlawed except as punishment for a crime. So police abolition succinctly is about severing the link between contemporary policing and historical racism.
Okay, so it doesn't mean no police.
I take a lot of inspiration from a book written by Alex Vital called The End of Policing, and so some people want to say that what I'm actually talking about is the end of racist policing as currently constructed or something else. That's literally what I mean by it. It's not theoretical, it's literally about ending racism in policing. And so if people think that that is actually not possible, I think that says more about the current imagination around policing than it does about my position. I think it is possible to have a world where policing is not racist, where there are not for-profit prisons, and where Black and brown people are safe in our neighborhoods. And some people might disagree with that position, and that's fine.
Okay, but I'm going to still give you the question I had planned to ask you because it's about staffing, and that's why I think it's important for people to understand that position
Right.
in the context of the answer that you're going to give. So he'll still have the minute and a half for this. You recently told KOW in reference to police reform that the City Council should not ratify pay increases, fund improvements to police facilities, or ratify any future SPOG contracts until there's a plan to get out from under the DOJ investigation. That wasn't a quote, but I was paraphrasing what you said.
Correct.
There's a lot of concerns about staffing.
Mhm.
What impact do you think all of that would have on the concerns about staffing and the staffing levels if indeed the city didn't ratify pay increases, didn't fund improvements to police facilities, didn't ratify any future SPOG contracts?
And we're going 90 seconds on this
Yes, I'll give
answer
you the
as
full
well.
90 seconds.
So I have never belonged to a profession or gone to a workplace that has been under the scrutiny of the federal government, but I would have to imagine that that has a depressive effect on workplace morale, to say the least. I would say that if there were any other avenue of civic life where, let's say, for example, the Seattle Office of Housing was under federal investigation, or our Seattle Schools was under federal investigation, we would, I think, have reasonable concerns about continuing to give more resources to whatever that institution might be until we can figure out how it is that we're going to end that investigation. And so I do not think that policing in the city of Seattle is exempt. I would have to say that the number one thing, that if staffing is a concern, if morale is a concern, wages are a concern, quality of life is a concern, public perception is a concern, maybe we should be doing everything that we can to end racist policing and get the Seattle Police Department out from under the consent decree. And that would probably have a lot of beneficial effects. One day we were tabling, my campaign was out in front of Wallingford QFC up in District 4, obviously, and somebody had mentioned to me that they were a member of the police department who was wanting to apply to become a member of the community service officer program, because I think they differed with a statement that was made earlier. They actually did think that police officers, as an abstract concept, could have a role in social services provision, and that the community service officer program represented the potential of that. So I would like to see the expansion of that program, number one, and I think that on the way towards getting towards a police force that represents an inclusive city, getting our police force out from under federal investigation is something that we need to be doing immediately.
Thank you, sir. District 5, Ann Davison Sattler. As you're aware, conversations surrounding a new North Precinct for SPD have been underway since, I think, the late 90s. It's been in the talks for a long time. It's a two-part question for you. First, can you just quickly state your position on building a new North Precinct? Because I believe you would prefer to have two, correct? Please take 30 seconds just to state your position.
Sure. If I can also ask Micah to bring me my coat, because I'm still shivering from being outside at the doors. I have a draft. I'm literally shaking. I do think that would be we would be a well-served North End to have two precincts, one on either side of I-5. I have met with Captain Sano, and I do think that's a critical piece. We are up there in the North End. When we have evidence we need to bring for inspection, we have to bring it all the way downtown. So we're taking officers off their patrol, and we want to make sure that we have them available. So to have a place where we can have that dedicated is critical, and I think it's a good plan to look for the future to have that available.
As you know, whenever this comes back up, it's always controversial. Plans to build this new precinct, they were in the very final stages in 2016 until activists calling it the bunker managed to sway council support, including the support of your opponent, Deborah Juarez. She says she supported plans for the new building, but she eventually gave in to pressure to halt the project. She says she, quote, took a beating for 2 solid years over her support for the building. I saw some of the insults that came her way, and they were not pretty. If you are faced with the same level of criticism over your stance on a new building, or in your case, multiple new buildings. How would you respond to that public pressure?
You have to listen to people, and I think it's terrible that people think it's the time or the place anywhere to name call or try to shame someone for what they care about. And so we have a lot of people that do have sincere public safety concerns in the North End. At the same time, it doesn't mean that we should shame them for it. And I think that when we do that, when we look at doing that to anyone, we are counterproductive. And I want to make sure all we're talking about is how we are moving forward and being productive and solving the problems of people in their daily lives. And in their daily lives, we are having people that are concerned. We are having people that are experiencing crime. We have residents who are feeling invalidated, that the experience that they're having is not being validated by their leaders. And I think that's a way that we can have both. And that means that we have dialogue that's honest and sincere. And that means that we really can make sure that the problems we have, the city council has the authority to handle certain things, and they need to be focused on those in particular and not anything outside of that authority.
Let me perhaps reword the question a little bit. Things get nasty at City Hall. The current council members get all variety of insults all the time. Sometimes public pressure, right or wrong, changes their minds about things that they were very ingrained in. So for you, how do you balance whatever blowback you might get with standing up to what you believe should be done, in this case in reference to the North Precinct?
Well, I'm already experiencing that right now. I have some people that have been harassing me since before the primary from another campaign. And so I do have that currently going on. And so I know that that will occur. But I think that once there is a clear plan that is laid out for the best interest for the public as a whole, then we need to stick to that plan. Unless there is really a critical piece that was not considered at the time, or something that intervened that was not considered at the time. We have to look for the welfare of the public. That is the job of the council. One of the main goals of any governance is to be good governance, and that means to care for the safety of the public. And that's in our care and our concern, and that has to be at the forefront.
Okay, thank you. District 6, I have to ask this question. In the conversation surrounding public safety, there was a local news documentary that I think has informed a big chunk of that conversation called Seattle is Dying. So I'm going to start with Heidi Wills on this question. Is Seattle dying in terms of what that documentary claimed?
You know, I'd say that a big part of the reason why I have the broad support that I do from business, from labor, from a lot of stakeholders within District 6 is because I've prioritized these issues of more effectively addressing the root causes of homelessness and having tough conversations about what that means, and prioritizing public safety. And I think that the good news from that documentary is that people are now talking about it. There's as many reasons why someone may find themselves experiencing homelessness as there are people. And sometimes people who are experiencing homelessness are talked about as if they're a monolithic group. And we know that's not true. They're very complex reasons. And we need an array of services to help people. But we also know to talk about it in terms of just economic instability is not giving justice to the fact that there are so many other complicating factors, including the fact that many people are suffering from substance abuse disorder, community, as well as suffering from mental illness. And our state is 59th out of the 50 states on how much we're funding mental health. That's deplorable. We need to do better. We also need to work as a region to address homelessness because Seattle cannot solve it in a silo. We are overburdened and overwhelmed. We have 80% of the temporary shelter beds in the city of Seattle for the entire county. We have 30% of the county's population, but over 70% of the county's homeless population. We need our regional partners to step up.
I know it seems like a shallow question, but is Seattle dying, Heidi?
Seattle is suffering. Seattle's a beautiful place, a lot going for us, but as I gave you those statistics earlier in my introduction, small businesses are leaving our community. Older people, younger people, families with children do not feel safe where they live and work. We need to do better.
Thank you. Dan Strauss, the same question. I mean, you know what the documentary laid out, correct? Do you believe that that is an accurate vision of the city of Seattle?
I would say that one of the reasons why I stood up to run is because I find that Seattle does things halfway. And we need to be able to provide full solutions to the problems that we're facing here in our community. And so is Seattle at large dying? No, Seattle's very strong. We have the solutions that we need, and we need to do them more, and we need to do them more effectively. And we need to get the region involved, because right now Seattle is bearing the burden of a regional crisis. If you need services or housing and you're from Covington to Duval, you're coming to Seattle. If you need to, and so what that does is it puts the onus on our city. And that's why we need to have a regional partnership so that we're not pushing people from community to community. We need to make sure that we have the transitional housing we need. We need to have the permanent supportive housing we need. We need to make sure that we have the affordable housing we need to ensure that people are stabilized in our community and have access to the services that they need: mental health services, chemical dependency, navigating social services. These are the things that we already have in place and we need more of. Seattle is dying. I think, open the eyes to many Seattleites that there is such a thing called medically assisted treatment. And I have found it to be very beneficial that Seattleites are now very aware of this. This is a program that Seattle has been doing before Seattle is Dying was aired. It continues to do, and we need to do more of.
I got to do a quick, I hate raise your hand questions and yes or no questions. I told Spog we're not doing those, but I got to do one. Raise your hand if you believe overall that documentary had a positive impact on the city. Okay, I was just wondering. Positive impact on the conversation surrounding the issues Seattle faces. Better way to word that question? Okay. So Anne's like, yes, thank you. Okay, we're going to go to District 7. Andrew, we'll start with you. This past week, a federal judge in Philadelphia issued a ruling stating that supervised injection sites do not violate federal law. Andrew, your boss called it, quote, an incredible ruling for the pursuit toward overdose prevention. Do you agree?
So I read that ruling. I thought it was really interesting. The essential crux of it is the federal judge determined that since the primary purpose of those sites is not to hook people up with illicit drugs, it's to prevent overdose, it's to engage in harm reduction, it's to provide medical services through bonded, research-supported interventions, that it did not run afoul of federal VUCSA laws, Violation Uniform Controlled Substance Act laws. I have a lot of questions for how we would implement that in this region. I do support the concept of a supervised consumption site. I call them supervised because there's nothing safe about putting fentanyl in your body. But undeniably, in some cases, they've stopped the spread of needle-borne disease. They've gotten needles off of our streets and out of our small business bathrooms. And there are certain benefits, and we should look into them.
Okay. Jim Pugel, the same question, but do you support, since Pete Holmes isn't your boss, I can't ask you the exact same question, but do you support a supervised injection site, and would you support it opening in District 7?
No, I do not support supervised injection sites. I did sit on the opioid overdose task force. That was a joint task force between city and the county. It was led by King County Public Health and the University of Washington. I heard all the arguments. I'm a huge supporter of harm reduction. I was one of the co-founders of LEAD. Also of 1811 Eastlake with the Downtown Emergency Service Center, which is a safe consumption site for a legal drug called alcohol. If we engaged, as soon as other municipalities found out that this was being talked about and that one would be cited in the city, one in the county, a bunch of the cities passed ordinances that would forbid it. So it would end up only being in Seattle. When someone is dope sick, they don't buy their drugs in Burien or Covington or Sammamish and wait with their ORCA card to go downtown to shoot up. They shoot up exactly soon after they buy that drug. It would not really help anyone at all. Most of the overdoses that are occurring now that result in death are people who are housed and they die in their homes. We would also be spending money that we could be using on prevention, on naloxone, on Suboxone, on methadone, on hiring outside counsel by the city attorney to defend it. So it'd be a waste of money and time.
Thank you. We're going to move on now to a couple questions from community stakeholders. So these are different from the audience questions. These were questions submitted ahead of time, and so I will let you know who they're being posed by. We'll start with District 1. So this question does come from the Seattle Police Officers Guild. We will start with Councilwoman Herbold. You're going to have a minute and 30 seconds. Let's see. The Seattle Police Department conducts exit surveys with officers leaving the agency, which often mention a lack of city council support as a major issue. To be fair, they also talk about the fake news and the biased media, so I've seen that one on there. How do you plan to show support, or how are you showing support for the men and women of the Seattle Police Department?
I appreciate the opportunity to answer this question. I, on a regular basis, show support for the police department. The most fundamental way as a council member I have of showing support for the police department is with my vote. I vote for the police department's budget. I vote for recruitment programs that hopefully will result in more officers staffing the department and meeting our staffing needs. And I've publicly thanked police officers on the blog that I publish every week on issues ranging from doing noise enforcement in Alki, working with me to draft new legislation to enable them to respond to community members' needs around noise enforcement, as well as doing emphasis patrols for South Park, responding to the South Park residents' concerns around increased shots fired. And as it relates specifically to the passage of the contract, I acknowledged the fact that police officers were not under any legal obligation to agree to bargain body cams or the accountability ordinance. The law says that if issues are not at the table at the beginning of bargaining, they don't have to bargain those issues, and they voluntarily did that, and I thank them for it. I appreciate the work that the police officers do to keep our city safe, and I look for opportunities to say so. But again, the most objective way I have of demonstrating my support is in the fact that I have voted for a raise for the police department. We've increased, in just my 3 years on the council, we've increased funding for the department from $300 million to $400 million a year. The department has 55% of the general fund budget, and I could go on. So thank you.
Phil Tavel, the same question. If you're sitting on the dais tomorrow at the City Council, how do you show your support for the men and women of SPD?
So it's by being vocal about saying thank you for the job they do, and by acknowledging how difficult it is that we are asking police officers these days to have specialties in trauma and mental health issues and substance abuse issues, and we're asking them to put themselves in harm's way all the time. And that means that our city leadership should be incredibly vocal about thanking them for that job and understanding how difficult it is. The other part is I would continue to do what I've been doing now, which is go on ride-alongs, sit on the Southwest Precinct Advisory Council, and listen. Listen to the officers, listen to the lieutenants, listen to the captains, listen at each level about what things the city could do better. And that's not just with money and salaries, but it's with making sure the staffing numbers are where they should be so that everybody can do their job. Making sure that there is support and training, and making sure that the equipment is there, and looking to create advancements. Like one of the things I learned on one of the ride-alongs was the fact that officers on the street should have access to warrant information so they can see when they're interacting with someone how many times that person has failed to appear in court, so they can do their job more accurately, and to create more of an open link of information between the sheriff and between different municipalities, so that when a person crosses that line from Seattle into White Center or Burien, we know what we're doing.
Thank you, sir. We'll move on to District 2, Mark Solomon. This question comes from the Seattle Firefighters Union, Local 27. Firefighters and police officers often respond to drug overdoses, complications from drug use, and drug deals gone bad. Do you support the creation of so-called safe injection sites? I actually agree with the name of it, the supervised injection sites. Yes or no, and why?
I have always personally said personally, I am not in favor of a supervised or safe injection site because of listening to our firefighters and our police officers who are encountering people and on a daily basis or administering those life-saving measures, those overdose reducing measures. I am a proponent of harm reduction. And one of the most effective harm reduction models we have is housing first, getting people someplace safe inside and providing the wraparound services they need to help them change their circumstance. I do believe that we need to have needle exchanges and more sharps containers in our public restrooms. I am a fan of the medically assisted treatment to again ease the effects of the drugs that are in somebody's system. My preference is treatment, getting people connected to treatment, to the services that they need to help them beat their addiction. That should be our priority. I understand that the goal of the safe injection site would be saving lives. And I think that's a goal we can all agree to. But I also think that when we look at the Health One program that the fire department has that is coming online that can connect people on the street to services, when I look at the Safe Station program that Tacoma has adopted that 39 other cities have in place to connect people to treatment right then and there, those are approaches that I want to invest in and support.
Thank you, sir. We'll move to District 4. Again, Sean, this is a community question. I'm going to tweak it slightly based on answers you've already given, or else I think it would be a little bit redundant. The question comes from a resident of North Seattle. Do you believe that every Seattle police officer engages in bias policing?
I would say yes. I would say also, so yes, I think it's also the case that there are some officers that are in areas of town where bias policing might result in the loss of life, the escalation of conflict where it need not be escalated. And there might be some other areas of town where bias policing might not have consequences that are as deadly. I think that it's definitely the case that when we talk about what it looks like to transition away from biased policing, the model of policing that we see richer and more privileged and frankly whiter neighborhoods enjoying, both in the city of Seattle and nationwide, points us in the direction of what it could actually look like to have decriminalization generally, what it could look like generally for Black and brown people to not feel under the specter of biased policing. We see what restorative justice looks like in the case of the woman who broke and entered the innocent man's house in, I think it was Dallas, if I'm not mistaken, getting 10 years, getting a hug from the family members of the folks who lost their loved one, the judge actually giving the woman a hug. So restorative justice for privileged groups is something that we have been very willing to accept and have a lot of examples for. And I think the lack of bias with respect to policing for people of color ought to look the same way.
Thank you. District 5, Ann Davison-Sattler, again, a community question. This question is from SPOG. Do you believe the men and women of the Seattle Police Officers Guild should be treated the same as other labor unions? Yes or no, and explain why. 90 seconds.
As a lawyer, again, I respect Phil having to wear both hats when you answer a question like this, right? Because public sector employees, we need to have them at their jobs. It's really critical that we make sure we have them there. People are relying on them on a daily basis, and we need to make sure that they are there providing the work that they were hired to do and hired to perform. I am also a strong proponent of collective bargaining. It is something that we need to have. It is establishment in our country, and it was needed that we had that. So making sure that there is a strong use of union positioning with the knowing that they are there to provide for the public. So I see them in a similar vein, but I do hold them at a different standard, particularly because they are providing services that are not available to us, but for their presence. So it's critical that we have them doing their jobs.
And can I ask you the question I asked Sean Scott in District 4 earlier? Would you support SPOG and the city voluntarily opening their negotiations up to the public?
SPOG voluntarily doing it?
Well, they would both have to voluntarily do it because law can't mandate it.
Right. Yeah, your question was that. I wanted to clarify your question. I actually see that if parties were willing to do so, I see there being benefits of doing it. I'm not saying that I would be in favor of parties doing it without them willfully joining to do so. I see that as we look at how things are going politically in the landscape, at whatever level of government you want to talk about, there is a balance of power that we need to make sure is there, and that in any type of group, we need to make sure that they are getting their needs met, but that they're not overburdening somebody else. And I actually see there could be benefits if we wanted to do it that way.
Okay, we're going to move on to District 6. Again, a community question. Dan, we're going to start with you. The question comes from the Soto Business Improvement Area, but I think that the question is relevant to businesses really anywhere. Some business owners believe, they're under the impression at least, that Seattle police officers are not being allowed to engage in proactive policing. How would you help empower officers to more proactively address illegal activity? 90 seconds.
Officers need to be able to do their jobs. Again, I've talked about police officers not needing to be our frontline social workers, and so that means that we need to have options for them at point of arrest to say, it's time for you to go into services, or you can go to jail. When I'm looking at the navigation team is only as successful as the beds that are available, and that's the 24/7 shelter beds. And the 24/7 shelter is only as successful as there are permanent supportive or affordable housing units for people to transfer into. We've seen the navigation team of San Francisco be much more effective because they have beds that are pre-identified as part of the program. And so when we need policing to be more effective or proactive, I would say having officers walk their beat, having officers know their community members and the community members knowing their officers, having opportunities for law enforcement to be backed up with social services so that they don't have to do that part of the job, and to have a place for people to transition people to that is warm, safe, dry, and that's connected to the services that these people need.
Heidi Will, same question for you.
Yes, we know from the repeat offenders report, right, that 100 people are committing over 3,500 crimes in our community. So when you hear statistics like that, the police have to wonder, with the hundreds of thousands of hours that they're spending to build these misdemeanor cases, and some are assault, why it's not going anywhere and why it continues to cycle, this spin cycle at the city. But thankfully, with the BIA's funding the report that Scott Lindsay wrote, we know that that we are not seeing resolution in 4 out of 10 cases within 2 years' time. That's deeply concerning. And when you know that these cases represent victims in our community, and it's repeatedly happening, particularly in our business districts, but also in our industrial areas. And Ballard has one of 2, Soto's the other. We're seeing a high incidence of property crime there, which is deeply concerning. We also know that police are actually sending fewer cases. So there is some depolicing happening, right? 24% fewer cases are being filed in the last 10 years. So I think that we're in this spin cycle right now within City Hall. It has a lot in part to do with our city attorney's office not filing cases. And I think that we need to demand our city leaders do their jobs.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on to District 7 for our final stakeholder question. The question comes from SPOG. Jim Pugel, we'll start with you. What is your definition of restorative justice in the criminal justice system?
Restorative justice has to be consensual. Both sides have to agree to it. And it is supposed to bring the person who's offended, who is victimized, who's preyed on the victim back into the community so that they're restored as a person who can participate in the community. But again, I emphasize, while I'm a huge believer and supportive in diversion, in harm reduction, we have to always involve the victims, because it's the victims that has paid a price that they did not ask to be involved in. This is especially true in domestic violence or other types of interpersonal violence. It's rare that you have restorative justice in those cases, but the closer the community, the smaller the community, the more intimate the community, the better we are suited for restorative justice. But it has to be carefully looked at. It does work, but again, it depends on the ethics, on the size of the community, and the history of that community.
All right, thank you. Andrew Lewis, same question. What's your definition of restorative justice?
Yeah, so restorative justice is about trying to put folks back to where they were before the harm that occurred happened. To explain it bluntly, you got to make sure that, I mean, as Jim just talked to, that it's consensual between the parties. Restorative justice only works if both victim and perpetrator want to participate in it. I have seen really sweet closure to cases where someone has received compensation for a harm, where the people have actually become friends by going through that process. I think that its application is a lot more limited in cases involving violent crimes or felonies. There are some promising programs that emphasize restorative justice. Family Integrative Restorative Services, FERS, which is a juvenile court program in King County, emphasizes restorative justice between minors and their parents, for example. So while it's domestic violence, those kinds of interventions and the kind of safety planning that goes through it and having a contract of expectations is able to bring better resolution. I don't think that restorative justice broadly is a practice that is going to get us out of the situation that we see today with public safety in the city of Seattle. I don't think it can broadly be applied to folks that have no intention of seeking that kind of closure with their victims.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to do a round of questions from folks in the audience. I'm going to fit as many as I can, but we got to give you time for your closing remarks. So I am going to start. Some of these are only directed to specific individuals and might not be relevant to both people in the district. So I'm going to start with Lisa Herbold. You might know that this question was going to come up, so I'm just going to ask it. For those who didn't see the news today, someone parked an RV in front of your house. I will say, no idea who's behind it, or if it's just a coincidence. So to put that out there, they wanted to give you an opportunity to respond to just how you're feeling about having that RV placed there, and we'll give you a minute and a half.
I actually put out a response today, so I've had a little bit of time to think about this.
Okay.
So it's not unusual for RVs to be parked on the street that I live on. Had an RV a couple months ago for several weeks in front of my house. And so in itself, if it was intended to be a political stunt, to make a comment about council members who don't have the same experiences as other people do in their neighborhoods with RVs occupying their neighborhoods, that's not the case. I've experienced that, and it's not shocking. It's unfortunate, and I don't think it's right to make fun of the plight of people who live in their homes in order to make a political statement. I will also say that I've worked hard. I have Seattle Public Utilities in my committee, and I've worked hard with Seattle Public Utilities in developing the RV remediation program. The RV remediation program is a program that uses objective criteria around RV locations to prioritize SPD and SPU going out, requiring RVs to leave, cleaning the areas. I champion funding for additional RV remediation in last year's budget. And the key is it's not council members who are deciding which RV locations get attention. It's not threats and intimidation of public officials that makes the determination of which locations get attention. It's an objective assessment of the public safety and health impacts of those locations.
All right, Phil Tavel. The question wasn't for you. I don't believe that anybody parked an RV outside your house today, did they? Okay. Do you have anything that you care to add in regards to this concern that citizens have about RVs being in residential areas, or about someone parking it in front of your opponent's house, whether intentional or not?
I mean, I understand where clearly some of that frustration comes from, but this crosses the line. It was way too much. It was, in my opinion, inexcusable and inappropriate. And what's happened since, I know Councilmember Herbold had said that people have then been throwing garbage on her lawn after that. And you know, this is exactly the issue we're having with civility, that you can make a statement, but it doesn't necessarily have to be done that way. So I don't think it was reasonable. I think it crossed the line. I really am sorry that it happened.
It was a nice moment, you two. You know, I like nice bipartisan moments. Okay, Sean, I've got a bunch of questions about police abolition, so I'm going to just meld them all together somehow. They're all kind of the same gist, though, which is, and I had asked you to clarify earlier, but I think given the amount of questions, maybe we could go at this again. So this is a question from a community member. They say they're a lifelong Seattleite. Does that mean no police at all? And what would replace it? And how would you ensure justice for victims of criminal offenders? So can you answer that question?
Well, you can, if it works, you can actually give me some of Alex's time to respond to some of these questions. If
Well,
we
give
want
you
to
a minute and a half.
talk
Let's see how you can do it in a minute and a half.
police abolition all night. Could you said that because there were a lot of components to that question.
They're
I wanna make sure I
confused about whether
understand
you don't want police at all.
Right. So I would say that what we have seen historically from policing has been policing that has really, really deep and entrenched institutional ties to racism. And so somebody will have to show me where it's possible under the way that we currently imagine policing, how we're going to get from there to no racist policing, right? So I would say that we have to reimagine what it looks like to have so-called public safety. We have to reimagine what justice looks like from the ground up. And I think that, again, as I mentioned in my first statement about this, if somebody thinks that it is not possible to have policing that is not racist, that says actually more about their position than it does about mine. I actually think that it is possible for us to get to a point where we have officers that serve first and foremost, where we have people who actually have faith in so-called officers. I think we have to reimagine what that looks like. But I think that we have to reimagine what it looks like to have policing. And so it's hard for me to answer this question.
Let me give you one of their specific questions then to follow up on.
Sure.
Now, this is a different person, 28-year community member.
Sure.
So let's just say today, as the police department is, if there was a shooter in your neighborhood, who would you call to help?
Is the shooter the police officer, or is it somebody who's?
I do not believe that the question.
That's a legitimate concern.
I'm going to read into this and say, if there is a shooter that is not a police officer in your neighborhood,
sure,
targeting, let's say, you or someone you love, who would you call to respond?
Presently, I think we don't have many options outside of the police force. So I would have to say that would be the first place that many people would have to turn. I also think that it's possible for us to get to a point where we do not have as much access to guns as we have. So that's a secondary conversation that we need to have as well. But I think it's obvious that we live in a world where it's not possible to turn anywhere for help on big questions like this, but to the police force. So I think that the answer to that question is pretty obvious. And my position has always been that we have to get to a point where we are disarmed as a public generally, where there is not as much access to guns generally. And therefore, I think this would become less of a concern in the future as a result.
Okay, thank you. I love this question, so I'm going to pick a couple people to ask it from. It's from a community member who says they've lived in Seattle for more than 25 years, Mark Solomon in District 2. I'm going to pose it to you first. What would you do to prevent people from getting harassed, waiting in line, and while making public comments at Seattle City Hall? This happens. I've been there. It can sometimes be an intimidating and a not so friendly place, both for council members and the public speakers who come to attend. So how would you help deal with that?
respect. By enforcing rules of respect for everyone who comes forward to take their time to come down to City Hall and address, the council members. I know we've all seen the video of the person who went to address council and council were looking at their phones. That's a sign of disrespect. If you're taking your time to come down and see me, I need to give you the courtesy of listening to you, of looking up from my phone and giving you the respect that you deserve. So anyone who comes to see us deserves the respect to be treated with dignity so that their voice can be heard. One of the focuses of my campaign has always been listening to the voices of the people of the district, making sure their voices are heard and that their needs are met and their concerns are addressed and that decisions that are impacting them, they have a say in that. And so when we set that model for ourselves as council, that we will respect you when you come to us and we expect you to respect each other when you're in our chambers. That's how we do it. Set the tone, be the example that we want to see modeled, in our chambers and in our community.
All right, thank you, sir. Ann Davison-Sattler, I want to pose the same question to you. City Hall can feel like a place where other opinions are not welcome, diverse opinions are not welcome. How would you make sure that anyone who decides that they're going to take time out of their day to come down to City Hall feels as if they can be there and it's a welcoming atmosphere?
This is really critical. We need to be rebuilding public trust between the residents and those that are elected into office to lead us, because we need to make sure we continue to know that the voters are the employers and those that are elected into office are the employees. And at the same time, that means that when someone is coming to speak at public comment time, which frankly, it shouldn't be in the middle of the day. It needs to be when people can come. So we should have a variety of times when people can come and make public comment time. But it means that the job of the elected person is to listen. And that means there should be no cell phones, no private communication modes available during that time. It is the mandated time when the public is allowed to speak. And there's nothing that would be an elected person's job but for listening to that person speak. And maintaining civility is obviously a requirement to speak, but there should not be any invalidation going on, any belittling going on, any demeaning going on, any condescension or contempt. And we have seen that from City Hall, and there is a lot of people who have experienced it firsthand. And I think that it's frankly time to put an end to that. And that means we vote other people into office who care about people and what they have to say and their concerns and are not going to be dismissive of what people are having to say at public comment time.
Councilwoman Herbold, I feel like I have to give you an opportunity. You're the only sitting council member who is here tonight. 30 seconds. Do you care to respond to a feeling that maybe council members don't respect people who come and show up?
That's, I understand that feeling. I've heard it before. I could see why people feel that way. It is a difficult balance between observing the rights of free speech with the rules of the council. The council actually has rules about how we're supposed to run our meetings and when meetings should be ended because of disruptions, when people should be asked to leave, and it's a really fine line. And I think if any of the folks at the table here end up becoming a council member, they'll find out how difficult it is. It is the obligation of the chair or the president, the person running the meetings, and so other attendees, other council members don't have a lot of opportunity to intervene when there is a problem. And I think Council President Harrell has done an admirable job of doing that balance. I have not myself in my committee meetings had those experiences, but I think that's really largely because those are the sorts of things that we see happen most at full council. But again, I really would ask folks to understand that it's a very delicate balance. You have to enforce the rules in a way that is even across all perspectives, because if not, it really will open the city up to a legal challenge and we'll end up in court about violating people's free speech rights.
All right, thank you. I wanted to give you an opportunity to respond to that. This question is for District 6 Stan Strauss. I was not at the Stranger Talent Show. This question is about that. So if the question isn't accurate, please feel free to correct it because I cannot fact check it. I wasn't there. It says this is from a nonprofit business owner, resident of Seattle for 50 plus years. At the Stranger Talent Show, you stated you were in favor of a drug consumption site in District 6. Is that true?
You know,
Did you say that?
I love yes or no questions.
Well, there's more to the question, but I just want to make sure that the premise was
So in
accurate.
a yes or no answer, the answer was yes.
Okay. How would you prevent any increase in crime and disorder for residents and small businesses as a result?
Right. So we know that safe consumption sites are not legally possible here in our city. That the court ruling that you discussed earlier is for the East Coast, not for our circuit. We also know that when the King County Prescription Opioid and Heroin Task Force passed a unanimous recommendation for a pilot program, it would identify 2 sites in the city of Seattle that already met the criteria. Now, the likelihood of that actually occurring in District 6 is quite low, and we know that we need to be able to provide harm reduction models that work. So I support harm reduction models and the principles of safe consumption sites, and I know that there's not a legal pathway or possibility for that to occur here in the city. So when you ask me my value statement in a yes or no answer, I'm going to respond with my values.
It's not my question, but
Yeah.
just so I'm clear where you're at with this, you support it, but you don't think it is ever going to happen.
Correct.
Okay. And on the issue of the Philadelphia court ruling that happened in federal court, maybe Andrew's going to jump in with his legal analysis on this. I mean, federal court rulings, when appealed, which the DOJ most certainly will appeal, they do have implications across the country. So theoretically, if the DOJ appeals and loses, it could pave the way for a site in Seattle, could it not?
Theoretically, and in actuality, this unanimous proposal from King County was on the books for 1.5 years before this campaign even began. So if this was going to be occurring within our community, we would be underway with it.
Heidi, I'm going to have you weigh in on that. Do you believe that there will ever be a supervised injection site in the city of Seattle?
I'm taking a no position.
You don't believe it'll ever happen?
I can't speculate whether that will happen or not, but if this federal court case does go through, then I think that it's important that you know where your city leaders stand on this issue. I don't support a safe injection site in my community, and if I can't support it in my community, how could I support it anywhere throughout the city of Seattle? I've been to Vancouver. I've toured InSite. I can't imagine that in South Ballard. We've already had a 4-fold increase in our level of people experiencing homelessness in Ballard the course of the last year. It's among the highest increase across the entire county is in our community. I also think that it is not scalable. One site would serve between 300 and 500 people. We have over 23,000 people suffering from opiate use disorder in King County. It's also not affordable. It's about $1.5 million per site. And I think those limited public dollars should be spent on treatment on demand.
Okay, thank you. We're going to do a few final audience questions for District 7, and then we'll do closing remarks. Andrew, I'm going to let you go first. Do you want to correct any legal analysis of this court ruling in Philadelphia?
No. I mean, the only thing that I would briefly say is that while it doesn't do anything actually outside of Pennsylvania really for us, but it is a federal court that's spoken on the issue. That opinion will be very influential to other federal courts and other circuits. I would also just say, I mean, if our state waited for the federal DOJ and the Trump administration before we did anything, our Muslim neighbors would still be on the tarmac at SeaTac and be banned from entering this country. So it is something to consider that the federal government under the Trump administration is not always legally correct. In fact, they rarely tend to be, according to Bob Ferguson's record in court. But anyway, that's my statement on that.
So there's a question directed towards you. It's from a community member who's lived in the city of Seattle for 30 years in the audience tonight. Could you speak to the issue that the city attorney's office has often not filed charges or pursued prosecution on SPD arrests. And they also asked if you could explain what division you're assigned to with the prosecutor's office.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to speak to that. So first of all, I am in the criminal division of the city attorney's office, and I'm proud to serve there. I'm proud to have brought a number of jury trials successfully and earned convictions for the people of Seattle. You know, I saw Scott Lindsay's report. I read it, both of them. Those are reports that I could have written about the needs of the office and the things that we really need to effectively do the job. We've got 31 prosecutors that go through 14,000 criminal referrals a year. And there are a couple things that we're missing in some of the recent analysis. One of the things that I will flag is we used to have a system that relied more on file by officer. So about a decade ago, from the statistics that Danny Westney was using that showed more filings, more things were filed because the policy of the office was to file immediately and file up front before any investigation had been done on the part of our office. That resulted in people that were innocent getting charged with crimes. It resulted in crimes that were completely unprovable getting charged. So even though more crimes were getting charged, that doesn't necessarily mean that less cases are being processed by the office currently today. You know, another thing is a lot of the new positions the office has been given are specifically delineated to important causes. So we have a lead prosecutor, but all they can do is work on lead cases. We have a firearm prevention prosecutor. They can only work on those cases. We have a Choose 180 prosecutor. It's great that we have those positions, but the result of that is those positions by council rule can't be moved around to accommodate other needs in the office. I would seek to make sure that the city attorney's office has the resources it needs, and I would be an advocate for them on the council to fully fund that office.
Thank you. Jim Pugil, we do have a question from a community member who's lived in Seattle for 16 years and is in the audience tonight. If you could tell another city how to deal with homelessness, drug use and sale, and a lack of prosecution of criminals, what would you tell the other city?
Homelessness, drug use, and crime.
Homelessness, drug use and sale, and lack of prosecution of criminals.
Well, homelessness, let's prevent homelessness in the first place. For those who are homeless, let's rapidly rehouse them as soon as possible. For those who are mentally ill, let's make sure that they're housed in permanent supportive housing. For those with co-occurring disorders of mental illness and addiction, whether alcohol or drugs, let's make sure that they have permanent supportive housing. For the 8 to 12% of the homeless who are what I call the will-nots, who are just involved in crime and who are making a free choice and who completely and always turn down all types of diversion and help, prosecute them. What I would also say is let's do it like we've always done it. When we've had any type of a crime problem, we have a task force. We have officers and detectives, sometimes from multi-agencies. We embed a prosecutor from the city attorney. We embed a prosecutor from the county attorney's office. We cross jurisdiction the muni attorney so that he or she can prosecute not only in Seattle Municipal Court, but also in District Court and Superior Court, and you focus on those offenders. So you give them a chance for diversion. If they don't take it, you prosecute them the old-fashioned way. It usually works, and then the message gets out.
Thank you. And we're going to, I think we're at the time where we should probably do some closing remarks. We're going to give you a minute and a half, and we'll do the closings in the opposite order that we did our opening remarks. So Andrew Lewis in District 7, we're going to start with you with your closing remark. 90 seconds, sir.
All right, thank you so much. And again, thank you all for coming out tonight. This is a really important conversation. I'm going to linger a little afterwards if you have any other questions, and I'll be happy to answer them. So, you know, I'm running for Seattle City Council because I grew up in this city. I'm impatient at the rate of response, impatient at the rate of change that we have seen from the city of Seattle. And I know from going back to my comments earlier about the city attorney's office, the things that we need to do to make a difference. Just to finish some of my comments on that, I'll use it in my closing. We could bring back a policy of charge by officer for DUIs. Our office charges almost all DUIs. We could go back to that practice for that at no cost of additional resources. The number that was cited, $2 million by the city attorney to have filing decisions within 48 hours, I will fight to get that appropriation for the city attorney's office. But barring that, $2 million is the ceiling. There's a lot that can be done in the office with even just 4 or 5 more full-time employees. that could see a massive increase in the frequency and the ability to promptly charge cases that currently get mired in a backlog. These are the kinds of issues that I want to work on the Seattle City Council. We need to have accountable leadership. We need to make sure that we are doing the job for the people of Seattle and delivering results. And I look forward to doing that on the council dais.
Thank you. Andrew Lewis, District 7. Jim Pugil, District 7, your closing remarks, sir.
Thank you all for being here tonight. I'm running because I have the experience of working on budgets, not only the Seattle Police budget, but as an assistant chief, working with other city agencies to make sure that our budget coincided with the needs and the delivery of services to the citizens, the visitors, and everyone else that visits or recreates or lives in the city. I've found it really rewarding. I've knocked on over 12,000 doors since March, and it's like being a beat officer again, whether it's in Belltown, whether it's in Pioneer Square, Queen Anne, Magnolia, or Interbay. I'm getting to listen to the folks again. I'm not talking to them, I'm listening to them, and that's what a good cop does. I want to get back into public service. I've shown that I'm innovative. I'm shown that I can listen, and I've shown that I can work with non-traditional partners to work on long stem problems and not necessarily solve them, but manage them a lot better. I can bring experience from not only the public safety realm, but the homeless realm and the transportation realm, and also having consulted in the private sector for 15 years, bring a look from the private sector as well. So thank you again for being here tonight.
Thank you. And could we get a round of applause for both the candidates in District 7? We're going to move on to closing statements for District 6. Heidi Wills, you can go first.
Thank you. As a mom and as a mother, safety and security are top priority for me. And I think we should be able to rely on local government for these basic functions. My campaign, as I said, has knocked on over 25,000 doors. I see some of the people who've gone doorbelling with me. Thank you for that. We've talked to thousands of people in our community, and people want change. What's happening now in City Hall is not working for a majority of our small businesses that I've talked to in District 6. People are almost shouting, prioritize core services, public safety, clean parks, open community centers, better transportation, more affordable housing, and especially addressing the root causes of homelessness. As a small business owner, a nonprofit director who has balanced budgets, met payroll, hired people, and let people go, I know that I bring the right experience that the City Council needs as we try to address these issues. We need to prioritize our first responders. Hearing that over and over again at the doorstep. They want to have City Council leaders who will stand up for them because they are standing up for us every day. I hope to earn your support. Thank you.
Heidi Wills, thank you. Dan Strauss, your closing remarks, sir.
Yeah, thank you all for having me here tonight. In this campaign, I want to address the root causes of the housing affordability and homelessness. I want to bring better transit and transportation options to our community. I want to open a district office so that folks don't have to go downtown to have their voice heard. And I'll have hours that are outside of the 9 to 5 so that for people that are working 9 to 5, they have an opportunity to have their voice heard without having to come down to City Hall, without having to have the 2 minutes, without having to have the folks, as you were talking about earlier. You know, I want to make sure that climate change is centered in all of my policy making. Because we know that we only have a few more years until our world is truly burning. And, you know, of my nearly 10 years of legislative and policy experience, I've spent just under the last 2 years working at City Hall. It allows me to know where the opportunities are. It allows me to know where the roadblocks are. I've been able to work on great things such as bringing different levels of government together with different departments so that we're able to create the solutions that we need. I haven't been at City Hall long enough to cause the problems we're experiencing, and I'm looking forward to being able to provide the solutions that we need for our city. I have the most organizational endorsements in this race, including you know, the transit blog, King County Democrats, the Young Democrats, the 43rd District Democrats, the 36th District Democrats, machinists, carpenters, teamsters, thank you for your time.
Right on, Mark. Dan Strauss, thank you. Could we get a round of applause for both of our candidates in District 6 for being here? Thank you. Ann Davison-Sattler in District 5, your closing remarks, ma'am.
Thank you again for choosing to spend your time listening to us up here in the evening. So again, I'm a Wedgwood mom, and I'm a lawyer. I'm a volunteer soccer coach for my daughter's team. They're U10, playing up a year. We're really excited. And it's really critical that we understand that families are having the conversations like my family is having. My kids are 8 and 10, and basically their entire lives, they have no memory of Seattle but for it filled with lots of trash and lots of tents and people clearly needing help, and they're not getting the help. So I know that all the other families are having these same conversations. So we declared that state of emergency on homelessness in 2015 as a city and as a county. But where's the proportional response that we are getting people help? So I have worked in a refugee camp, people fleeing from civil war, and it was more hygienic there than what we have people living on the streets here in Seattle. It is critical time. We have first responders who are at the front lines providing help to people on the streets, while we have elected leaders who are not stepping forward with a policy approach of how we get someone into affordable housing, and what do we do in the transition time until we have it built? Because we're allowing developers to pay out of providing it today. We need to have a plan so we have people in from out of the cold for yet another winter. I'm endorsed by the Seattle Times over the incumbent because it is time for change. It is a critical time that we rebuild trust between the public and our people that we elect into office, because they are just people like all of us in the room. It is time for a different approach. We need to turn it on its head and expect a different outcome. I'd appreciate your vote in November. Thank you.
Ann Davison-Sattler, District 5, a round of applause. Sean Scott, District 4, your closing remarks, sir.
Thank you so much for moderating, for the great questions, for everybody who's participated in this discussion. I think it's definitely the case that what we have seen over the last half decade or so in the city of Seattle is really the abdication of the city of Seattle's responsibility to protect some of our most vulnerable citizens. Part of the reasons why we are having this conversation, a very robust conversation, obviously, about public safety, whichever side of the issue that you are going to come down on, I think most people would agree that the city of Seattle needs to be doing more to make sure that our houseless neighbors are housed, to make sure that our affordability crisis is actually being addressed with real social and public housing. It's part of the reason why we are proud to be endorsed in this race by the Washington Low-Income Housing Action Fund, because we have tried to put forward some really, really concrete solutions around raising the progressive revenue that we're going to need to take action on building out supportive housing, to take action on actually providing more social housing, to take action on potentially establishing a city-run safe injection site, which I do support. I think that it's really, really clear that in this election cycle, the choice is going to be between compassionate solutions, which I think even the Chamber of Commerce, which obviously has not endorsed me in this race, has said on paper that we need to have more of, with our revenue commitment being at about 50% of what it needs to be county and citywide towards providing more supportive housing. So I hope that when we're evaluating these candidates and we're going to vote in the run-up to November 5th, that we're going in the direction of compassionate solutions, which are solutions for more funding that actually get us to the place where we're actually able to meet the obligations that we have to some of our most vulnerable residents in the city.
Sean Scott, District 4, can we get a round of applause? Thank you for attending this evening. I do want to note, for those who came late, Shama Sawant opted not to attend. Egan was here, but he had to leave for another forum in District 3, so we heard from him earlier in the evening. District 2, Mark Solomon, your closing remarks, sir.
Thank you, and thank you all for being here tonight. It is truly an honor. I began this race with one primary goal in mind: prioritizing the people of my district, making sure that their voices were heard, that their needs were addressed, and that they were involved in the decisions that impact them. Public safety is the primary responsibility of city government, and our resources are stretched too thin. Our staffing levels are low compared to other cities of comparable size. When I look at Boston, that has about 50,000 people less than we do, but their officer staffing ratio is about twice as what we have. we are not able to engage in relational policing. We're not able to engage in proactive work that we need to do. And I want to be on council to address those public safety concerns, to make sure our officers are fully staffed. When we have officers who are trying to get to priority calls, but there's no cars available for them to go, that's an equipment issue that we need to take care of. I am committed to the public safety of my community. I am committed to listening with our officers, working with our officers, working with community and our other first responders to make sure that we address the public safety needs of our community. And in doing so, we can ensure that everyone who lives here, works here, plays here, can enjoy safety in their community. And I thank you for the opportunity, and I ask for your support.
Mark Solomon in District 2. Before we applaud, I feel compelled to note that Tammy Morales is observing the holy day of Yom Kippur, and so that is the reason for her absence. I do feel like it's important to note that. But a round of applause for Mark Solomon for being here this evening. Phil Tavel, District 1, your closing remarks.
Yes, thank you to everybody. And also just to say, I also am observing Yom Kippur today. However, I do know that the teachings of the Torah tell about the fact that community is important. And there are some times where you do things that are outside of being observant to show up. And that's not against Tammy, just to make sure people understand. Look, thank you for coming out. Thank you for SPOG for putting on forum about public safety, because right now this is the crucial issue in our city. This is the intersection of homelessness, of property crime, of violent crime, of feeling you have a livable city that you can love and you can be here and you can feel safe in. Everybody deserves to feel safe. When you see a report of someone grabbing a cup of coffee and throwing it in a toddler's face, or people being shot or attacked or whatever it is, these are public safety issues. Right now, we need a city council that understands how these things come together. And the criminal justice system is also at the heart of this. You need to be able to work with, like I said, the Seattle City prosecutor, the King County prosecutor, the police, the mayor's office, the council. We all need to be on the same page about these things, and we need to be able to say we are a city of laws. We enforce those laws, and we need the police to know that if they arrest someone because they break the law, that person will be charged with a crime. Then we can use our cooperative courts to get at the root issue of that lawless behavior, which may be substance abuse, it may be mental health issues, it may be other things. And that's why we have Veterans Court, Mental Health Court, Drug Court, not necessarily in the city, but we need to bring it together. And so I ask you to put me on City Council where I can bring these pieces together. Thank you.
Councilwoman Lisa Herbold, you have the final closing remark, 90 seconds, ma'am.
So I started my remarks at the start of the forum talking about my experiences as a community organizer working in low-income communities of color for better public safety responses from their city in response to their needs, and in recognition that folks who live in low-income neighborhoods pay taxes too, and they deserve an equal level of public safety and police services. I'd like to end my remarks with a recognition of the work that my staff and I do for the residents of District 1, specifically on public safety issues. Of all the constituent issues that we handle in our office, public safety and transportation are the things that we spend the most time on. I've worked with the residents of South Park to create a South Park Public Safety Task Force, which led to the funding of a public safety coordinator for South Park. I've worked with the residents of South Delridge to improve 911 response. I work on an ongoing basis informing people how to access the RV remediation program, informing the public of the city's process for prioritizing encampment removal while explaining the scope of the problem of homelessness and our investments in outcomes that produce results. I met with the 7 BIA directors who commissioned the Prolific Offenders Report when no one else was talking to them. I invited them into my office and I sponsored with Councilmember Gonzalez a forum in City Council to hear their recommendations. I'm working with residents of West Seattle to expand the LEAD program in Southwest Precinct, and I've worked to develop an abandoned building monitoring program to address derelict buildings in my neighborhood. I look forward to working next year on making sure that we address the number one issue that District 1 residents have in their micro-policing plans, which is coverage. And in order to do so, we need to work on retention, recruitment, and compliance with the consent decree. Thank you.
Thank you. And if we can get a round of applause for both of our candidates in District 1 for attending this evening. For those of you who wish to stick around, I'm told there's dessert. I can't vouch for what dessert it is, but I'm sure it's delicious. And some of the candidates will be sticking around to speak with you. And I'm going to flip the script, and I think candidates should give a round of applause to people coming out on a Wednesday night to hear about public safety. So thank you, everyone, for attending. Please drive safely. Oh.